In December 2010, the tiny but gas-rich Gulf state of Qatar won the bid to host the 2022 World Cup, marking a historic moment for both the country and the entire Arab world. This would make Qatar the first Arab and Middle Eastern country to welcome the global sporting event, but this came with a price. Almost immediately after the milestone announcement, Qatar pumped billions into launching mega infrastructure projects to prepare for the event, employing an army of migrant workers to build the country, construct stadiums, and change its landscape almost entirely. It was at this moment that many organizations and countries around the world turned their focus on Qatar's human rights record. And at the time, with poor conditions and outdated labor laws, it didn't look too promising. Ears pricked up in Doha, and for the next decade, authorities rallied to rectify years of neglect that had led to abuse, exploitation, and even the death of some migrant workers. This step towards change was in itself a significant feat, especially when compared to neighboring states. To fully understand how far Qatar has come since then, let's take an in-depth look into the evolution of the country's labor laws. Qatar's human rights record was mainly criticized because of two pillars: the kafala system and harsh working conditions for workers across the board. The kafala, or sponsorship system, first emerged in the 1950s to regulate the entry, exit, and residence of millions of migrant workers from countries in West Asia, but it was then rolled out to all expats working in Qatar. Under the system, a worker's immigration status was legally bound to an individual employer or sponsor, also known as kafil in Arabic, for their entire contracted period. This meant that an employee could not enter the country or transfer jobs for any reason without obtaining explicit written permission from his or her employer. But that wasn't all. Workers were also made to obtain a document called the No Objection Certificate from their employer if they wanted to leave the country under any circumstances. Such laws led to an imbalance of power and left significant room for abusive practices on the employer's end. In many cases, employers would exert further control over the worker by confiscating their passport and travel documents altogether. In short, migrant workers found themselves stuck in Qatar due to unfair practices by individual employers who denied them the right to leave. Human rights groups around the world called this modern-day slavery. But as unjust cases continued to increase and more global pressure was applied, Qatar knew it had to make significant changes. And it did. Since it won its 2022 World Cup bid, Doha has been working relentlessly to finish dozens of state-of-the-art projects in time for the tournament. But such efficiency came with a price, and that price was often a human one, paid for by migrant workers, especially those working in construction. Qatar had already adopted new legislation back in 2007, prohibiting outdoor work between peak heat hours during the hottest months of the year. But companies often ignored these rules. With global focus now on Qatar, authorities began implementing a zero-tolerance approach. The decision also stipulated all work must stop if the temperature rises beyond 32.1 degrees Celsius in a particular workplace, regardless of the time. Workers must also be provided with personal protective equipment suitable for hot weather, including light, loose-fitting clothing, and receive annual free medical examinations to diagnose and manage chronic diseases that may contribute to the risk of heat stress. To showcase its commitment to addressing concerns, Qatar also welcomed the International Labour Organization in 2018, allowing it to set up an office in the country. In the years that followed, Doha's journey to implement change was closely monitored by the UN agency, which has on several occasions issued statements to commend authorities for taking bold steps. Doha also established a labor dispute resolution committee to settle any issues between employees and their employers. And in 2020, in a last bid push 2 years ahead of the World Cup, authorities introduced sweeping labor reforms that were hailed by rights organizations and world powers alike. The historic amendments included allowing migrant workers to change jobs before the end of their contract without the need to obtain the No Objection Certificate from their employer. This simple yet groundbreaking move effectively made Qatar the first Gulf country to dismantle the controversial kafala system in its entirety. A minimum wage of 1,000 Qatari riyals was introduced for employees of all nationalities in both private and governmental sectors, including domestic workers, the first such non-discriminatory minimum wage in the region. This was in addition to a mandatory allowance of at least 300 and 500 Qatari riyals to cover costs of food and housing respectively, if they are not already provided as a part of the contract. The historic amendments marked a significant step for workers in the country, but pressure, mainly from Western football federations and teams, continued, and there was still a long way to go to improve conditions. Companies that conducted business with impunity for decades continued to violate the law despite warnings from the Ministry of Labor. This year alone, authorities temporarily closed hundreds of work sites for not adhering to necessary precautions on permissible working hours. While the swift handling of the situation has been welcomed, it was still late for hundreds of workers who were previously made to carry out construction labor during temperatures that averaged around 41.2 degrees Celsius or even higher. While no heat-related deaths were officially reported during 2021, a report by Amnesty International said that health officials failed to provide detailed information on the circumstances of death for some migrant workers. The rights organization said reports issued sometimes used vague reasoning, such as acute heart failure and acute respiratory failure due to natural causes, all of which could be due to prolonged exposure to heat. As rights reports and criticism continue to flood in, Qatari authorities, backed by the ILO, have pointed to the positive steps the country has taken to address the issues. In response to some calls for a boycott of the 2022 tournament, the government said such protests failed to take into account reforms introduced and implemented on the ground. Echoing statements by some experts, it also said such criticism is part of a major Western-led media campaign designed to propagate false information on the Gulf state. It's been established that a coordinated campaign to discredit Qatar and sabotage the upcoming FIFA tournament has been ongoing for some time, with fingers being pointed at some of Qatar's neighbors for orchestrating it. While it continues to crack down on companies who violate the reform laws, the government also noted most violations are due to a lack of awareness on the employees' side. This has led to increased campaigns and workshops to ensure all workers are empowered with information, including knowing their rights and how to safely submit complaints to authorities if they are mistreated. It's clear that there are still issues that need to be carefully addressed when looking at conditions for migrant workers in Qatar and the wider region. Despite the new measures, most of which have admittedly been triggered by Doha's willingness and commitment to change, there is still a long way to go when it comes to holding those who break the law accountable. With or without the upcoming World Cup, Qatar's position on the global stage and its ambitions to garner influence on a regional and international level require it to continue to progress and evolve. For now, it's clear the fire for change has been sparked, and if Qatar wants to continue on its path to become a world leader, it must protect that flame with all it has. Don't forget to let us know your thoughts in the comments below and share this video with your friends so they too can join the conversation.